Right, so today we're going back, way back, to the time of Acheulean handaxes. Now, if you caught our last episode, you'll remember we talked about these universal patterns in art and how our brains are sort of hardwired to pick out profiles and simple shapes. We saw that prehistoric art wasn't just random doodles, it was shaped by ancient brain wiring. But handaxes, those strange, often beautiful stone tools from up to 1.8 million years ago, well, they're a different kind of mystery, aren't they? Were they just tools, functional for butchery and other practical purposes, or was there more to it? There was this rather brilliant exhibition, I actually wish I could have gone, at the Nasher Sculpture Centre in Dallas called First Sculptures. Tom Wynne, an archaeologist, and Tony Burlant, who's a practicing artist, brought together some of the most striking Acheulean handaxes ever found. The buzz was that some of these really blur the line between pure function and, dare I say, art. And I know art can be a bit of a loaded word in this context, but the evidence is hard to ignore. Certain handaxes show this obsession, maybe that's a strong word, but really, an obsession with refinement, symmetry, and shape. If you look at early handaxes, most are sort of rough and, let's be straightforward, probably just meant to do the job, slice, dice, get the gristle off the bone. But then you get these odd standouts, even from the very beginning, where some napper put in hours, seriously, hours, carefully shaping the sides until they match almost perfectly. These outliers become more and more frequent by the early Middle Pleistocene, and certain assemblages start featuring higher and higher proportions of these finely worked symmetrical tools. So the million-year-old question, did they just get carried away sharpening, or was there some sort of, proto-aesthetic intention? It reminds me of wandering into a museum here in London and feeling magnetically drawn to something odd, a lump of stone that at first just looks utilitarian. But the more you look, the more you think. There's something going on here. That's what these refined handaxes are like. If you line them all up, it's the oddities, the ones that break away from pure practicality, that really stick in your memory. Maybe the napper just wanted to show off their skills, or perhaps, and I might be stretching here, they found some deep satisfaction in achieving that perfect curve. Anyway, most archaeologists now agree that at least some handaxe makers cared about more than just chopping. The trend seems fairly clear in the evidence. As nappers got more skilled, they started deliberately investing time and effort into symmetry for its own sake, even after improvements in sheer practicality kind of hit a ceiling. There's only so sharp you can get, after all. What happens next in that story is where things get rather interesting. So, what's going on inside the brain when someone's making a symmetrical handaxe? Turns out, thanks to some nifty brain scan studies, when nappers worked on a symmetrical biface, several regions fired up. The dorsal stream for manual dexterity, the ventral pathway for visual imagination and memory, and, crucially, the right orbitofrontal cortex, which is tied to feelings of reward. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the same area that lights up when you listen to your favourite song or see a painting you really like. What's fascinating is that this regular, patterned action, chipping away in rhythm with an eye toward symmetry, seems to have accidentally led to feelings of beauty and pleasure. It's a byproduct, maybe even a happy accident, of aiming for technical mastery. Early on, the marks and patterns were just practical, but as they refined their skills, these makers became more perceptually aware of what they were doing, sometimes spotting geometric regularities or pleasing shapes emerging from the accidental scratches and cut marks produced in the process. You see echoes of this in other species and across time. Neanderthals, for example, made repetitive patterns, scratching zigzags and straight lines, sometimes just as marks during butchery, but increasingly, it seems, for their own sake. There's the Trinil shell, 500,000 years old, with a deliberate zigzag motif, and sites like Bilsingsleben show repetitive marks dating to nearly 350,000 years ago. It suggests early humans and, well, their relatives started to enjoy the act of making things regular, even before they made anything we'd recognise today as art. Now, if you compare this with what we talked about in episode 1, where art may have hijacked circuits evolved for survival, cutting, slicing, reaching for food, it makes sense. As skills developed and the technical side became automatic, the brain reached a point where there was cognitive slack, extra attentional capacity. And what did our ancestors do with it? They started to play, to enjoy symmetry, and to make marks and patterns that gradually escaped the strict confines of tool-making. Over generations, this blend of rhythm, pattern, and perception laid the foundation for what would become proto-aesthetic behaviour. Now, here's where it gets properly human. The neuroscience suggests that as these perceptual circuits, manual, visual, reward, became ever more interconnected, something big happened. That implicit, almost accidental pleasure in symmetry started shifting toward explicit, socially meaningful aesthetics. It's a bit like the difference between humming a tune to yourself while working and suddenly realizing others are listening, and now you're performing. Increased brain size and complexity, especially from about 600,000 to 150,000 years ago, meant these pathways crossed over more and more, not just allowing greater awareness of form and shape, but also its meaning within the group. With all that extra cognitive bandwidth, suddenly marks and patterns became signals, reflecting not just skill but sometimes individuality. Refined handaxes started to show a kind of assertive personal style, possibly even as gifts, imagine that, and the act of pattern-making detached from pure utility, becoming proto-artistic. There are fascinating studies showing that humans across ages and sexes prefer symmetry. It's quick, almost unconscious. Children, even infants, are drawn to symmetrical faces and objects. But what's really important is what symmetry does socially. Producing and appreciating symmetry, think of those beautifully worked handaxes, could have strengthened bonds within groups. The making of something special by hand could act as a social technology, reinforcing trust, camaraderie, maybe even admiration. And before I wrap up, it's worth noting, as we saw in earlier episodes, these kinds of proto-aesthetic behaviours provided a foundation for the full explosion of symbolic art down the line. The journey from handaxe to cave painting wasn't an abrupt leap, but a slow, deep process of neural and cultural evolution. So, next time you see a carefully shaped stone, or even a child making repetitive marks in the sand, you're looking at a tiny echo of that ancient urge to find meaning and beauty in pattern. All right, that's enough cognitive archaeology for today. Thanks for listening and stay curious. We've only just scratched the surface of where art comes from.